Greetings everyone, I am Dr. J and welcome to the end of year channel update for 2023. For those of you who are new to the channel, every 6 months I like to take stock of how things have been going and give an idea as to what you can expect in the future. Usually I live stream these, but since I wanted better visuals this time, I decided to record it offline. It's a curious balancing act because, on one hand, doing it live means the few people who are awake can offer feedback, and it's easier to toss the video out at the same time. On the other hand, it also means what I'm saying is more off the cuff, and the most you get for visuals is me trying not to die in Torchlight 2, though I suppose there can be some amusement when I run into trouble and panic while avoiding death. In fact, part of one of those channel updates made it into the Torchlight 2 retrospective, as I had the perfect contrast between getting through an Act 2 boss by the skin of my teeth, and then getting mulched twice by some right bastard of an elite monster that was seemingly perfectly designed to take out my berserker. Fun in the moment perhaps, not so great for communicating information. Regardless, feel free to let me know what you prefer. Getting to the topic at hand, I end this year with mixed feelings, because this was a year where very little went according to plan. The start of the year was emblematic of this, as I had intended to keep my head down until I had properly finished a video I've been working on for a while, specifically the Pillars of Eternity review. The problem there is that I'm trying to experiment with my presentation style, and challenge myself to learn how to draw for it. And because I'm still very much an untrained novice, what would take a professional weeks is taking me much longer than that as I try and try and try again. So that work has been getting the long-term project treatment where it ends up being a small part of my routine, but not a major focus. Hell, if it weren't for the drawing I'm trying to do for it, I could have had that video done and dusted before the Advance Wars remaster released. Fortunately, that remaster ensured that I had something to show for my efforts before the summer arrived, and my plan to do a retrospective on Baldur's Gate 2 before the third game released ended up working out too. You'd think after that point it would be smooth sailing, but then we get into what I initially had in mind for the year. To start with, since my channel is at its best when I'm talking about CRPGs and Diablo-style games, I had every intention to review one of the latter this year as well. In fact, the comments on the Torchlight 2 retrospective gave the perfect option, as after talking both Diablo and Torchlight to death, what better next step than to look back at Fate? For the unfamiliar, it is a game that released in the early to mid-2000s that's a curious middle ground between the atmosphere of Diablo and the bombastic action in Torchlight. Fitting perhaps because the lead developer of Fate also had a major hand in Torchlight. So seeing that, it made sense to jump on it, but then I actually started playing it. And in case the framing doesn't give it away, the first impression was not a positive one. I made the decision to start as a swordsman, which meant my first run ended up being an exercise in tedium. If I had to describe why without going into too much detail, it can be summarized as not realizing how good we have it now until we go back to something more basic. Fate seems to have taken the idea that, hey, you're not here for story, you're here to descend below, find cool loot, and level a character for honor and glory. And that's an attitude I can respect. The problem is, after growing used to things like just hitting a number key to cast a spell instead of hitting an F key then spamming right mouse button, it's really hard to go back to something more basic. Especially when the unique gimmick for this one, namely an infinite dungeon, means that after a few levels, you've seen most of the tile sets in play, and are just focused on getting through it for the sake of the core gameplay loop. And when you're used to something more engaging, well, here we are. As evidence that I wasn't finding myself all that engaged with the game, what tends to happen in those cases is when I have to start forcing myself to play it, and/or other games arise to drag my attention away. And at this time, the distraction ended up coming from an unexpected source, because as the year continued, I had an idea. If you put a gun to my head and asked me to rate Breath of the Wild, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Definitely a cut above the average, but not enough to outpace my strong disdain for open world elements. So with that in mind, I see Tears of the Kingdom slated for a May release date and think, I wonder if this would be a good opportunity for a second chance. I mean, Breath of the Wild was hyped up to me as the best thing since sliced bread, but this time we'd have their second attempt at it where they can refine what they're doing, and I can go in with more accurate expectations. Thus, especially after seeing everyone praise Tears of the Kingdom on the same basis, I decided to wait a couple of months before diving in, with my first 40 minutes or so happening on stream as part of a variety night over on my other channel, Dr. J Unscripted. My expectation was that it would be a modest improvement, but more than that, I wasn't sure. Until I got a few hours in and realized that the majority, if not all of the problems I have with Breath of the Wild, such as the lack of dungeon variety and some game balance concerns, were eliminated. And in order to prevent the game from dominating my life, I'm having to take the cartridge out of my Switch, put it back in its box, and set that on my shelf where I can't just lazily put it back in. which then meant I had to basically force myself to play a level a day in my first Fate run just to get through it. Thankfully, the game has been more fun since moving on to a mage/summoner build. Given what I learned from that run, I want to play through it one more time, with that final run being an attempt at splitting my focus between ranged weapons and summoning spells. Since there's no strict class structure, I've done a pure swordsman, I've done a mage/summoner, now I want to see if a beastmaster of sorts can hold its own, if only to confirm my game balance concerns. Once that's done, it should be trivial to wrap up the script and get the video done. All that to say, that was supposed to be the game I reviewed right after Baldur's Gate 2, but then the game ended up taking me much longer to get through in terms of time commitment and personal investment. Instead, I had to pivot, though luckily I had options. One of them was a retrospective on Battlezone, which is one of the most unique games I've ever played. Not the most ideal timing given that it's 2 retrospectives back to back and about very different subjects, but I'm happy with how the videos turned out all the same. The other pivot was to Devil May Cry, which could act as the Through the Looking Glass review this year. I'll admit that I was nervous about how the video would do, as the genre is very much not my wheelhouse, and in hindsight I was probably a bit too self-deprecating on that basis, but it seems to have been well received for those who watched it, so I suppose I can't complain on that count. The real test will be whether I can identify why everyone thinks the second game is garbage, I suppose, whenever I can find time for that. And yeah, that's pretty much the year. With how little went according to plan, I'm at least thankful about what I was able to put out, and that the majority of it was geared towards whittling down my backlog. With that said, now we look to what you can expect for the next 6 months. I've already touched on Tears of the Kingdom, and my plan there is to release a review on the 1-year anniversary of its release, specifically May 12th, with the intent of seeing how well it holds up now that we've had all the time in the world to explore it. Besides, there was no way I was reviewing it close to its release day, as even if I wanted to, I was in the middle of buying a house. It's honestly a miracle that the Advance Wars video got done while I was mired in all of that. Still, that's a bit far away from now, so what can you expect more in the short term? Ideally, it'll be the Fate review, but given I've still got a ways to go on the 3rd run, I suspect it'll be a while before I can start working on it. Instead, what's likely to start the year is a review of Wargroove 2. For the unfamiliar, it is the sequel to a game that took heavy inspiration from Advance Wars, though it made substantial deviations to that style of turn-based strategy. I was worried when it was announced about whether it would be good, as the original game's story was pretty self-contained, and its spin on the genre did some things that were an improvement, but others that hurt replayability a little. Fortunately, based on the campaign alone, a lot of my concerns were moot, as the new units and game mechanics had a nice degree of variety, and the story ended up being the strong point, funnily enough. I need to spend more time with the Conquest mode to be sure I understand it, though at the time of recording, I'm taking time off from my day job, so I should have ample time to spend on both Fate and wrapping up my time with Wargroove 2. Still, it'll be up in the air as to which one is released first, so keep an eye on the community tab for more information as I make progress there. And that's all I have set in stone, as it were. Given that I don't have a fully finished script at the time of recording, there is always the possibility of something moving, and my best guess at this point is that it'll be Fate that moves given the time commitment required. My playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom is almost done, I just need to clear a few more shrines and attend to some side quests, and I'll feel good about taking on the final boss. That one I hope won't be moving, given I'll have a hard deadline for May 12th if I want to add 1 year later to the title, so I may actually start working on that review at the start of the new year, since the completed parts of the script aren't likely to change much. It's gonna be a weird time period as far as what I'm working on, but I hope that I'll be able to attend to all 3 games on the docket within the next few months. As for the remainder of next year, I tend to avoid planning that far ahead, as the further out you plan, the more likely something shows up that throws you for a loop. That can also apply to what's going on in the here and now though. So if you want a closer look as the year progresses, I do regular monthly updates in the community tab of this channel. If ever there's a change of plan or something comes up, that'll be the place for it. It's also relevant because I post regular updates for long-term projects there, which are any videos that either have something different about it that warrants more time than normal, or are gonna have a runtime longer than an hour. To that end, the newest Fire Emblem and Baldur's Gate 3 will eventually feature on that long-term project snapshot, but as of now, my focus is on the following. First off is Pillars of Eternity. As of now, I've got almost all of the rough sketches I need taken care of, so my goal for the year is to get the final line work hashed out, add shading, texture, and color, and then it should be a matter of doing my usual polish phase with the video that's there. I'm expecting it to take the rest of the year now that I have a better estimate of how much time I need, which is probably my own damn fault for letting the scope of the work get away from me, but still, I think I've got a clear idea of how long it'll take now. The other project is a pair of videos you're not gonna see this year, which is a long-winded review of Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes. Given how much I talked about the game it spun off from, namely Fire Emblem 3 Houses, there was no way I wasn't going to go insane talking about as much as I could regarding this one. And based on what I have right now, it's definitely not something that'll be ready next year unless I make it my sole occupation. For anyone hearing this for the first time, I have 2 videos planned. One of them is a spoiler-free review going over how well it holds up as a video game, which will be about 45 minutes. The audio editing for that one is done, and it still needs a fair amount of video editing taken care of. The second video is a scene-by-scene critique of the main story, which is where the project becomes an absolute nightmare. To give some perspective, to cover the game's 3 routes, including important information, praise, criticism, and what have you, my now finished script is about 60,000 words. My script for the Fire Emblem 3 Houses review was about 30,000, with that video being almost 2.5 hours. I'm in trouble. As far as that video is concerned, the only major progress is on the script being effectively done, with some headway made with recording. In short, that one's gonna take a while. Still, I'm reducing how much time I spend streaming next year, so I should have more time dedicated to getting through stuff like this, so more on that later in the year. And that's all that needs to be said about the review channel. As a quick overview, while this year may not have gone according to plan, the end result should lead to us avoiding the early year absence we saw this time around. Regardless of whether Wargroove 2 or Fates are the first games, they will both be attended to, with a review of Tears of the Kingdom on May 12th being another review set in stone. From there, I'll see what makes the most sense to cover next, and should have plenty of progress made on both long-term projects in that time as well. Thus, with that summary, let's engage in some last-minute shilling. First off is the Discord server, where if you want more direct updates on what I'm up to on a more regular basis, that's a good place for it. Most of the updates are for my other channel, Dr. J Unscripted, which is my Let's Play and livestream channel, where you can watch some of what I have reviewed or intend to review over there. And if you want an idea on the kind of shenanigans that occur, here's an example of Baldur's Gate 3 being a good video game.
Fireball! Counterspell? You little bitch! Alright, time to have some fun. Thunderwave! Stop it! You scum! Okay, he can't have too many more of those at least.
Can't afford to let up.
At least in theory. Freaking counterspell! I hate it!
Time to push my luck again.
Anti-fun? Maybe. Properly using the game mechanics to prevent me from engaging in shenanigans? Good stuff, as I'd expect from a difficulty mode named Tactician. And finally, I actually do have one last video to close the year out. Tomorrow morning, I'll be putting out my first attempt at an editorial style video in a very long time. Whenever I've tried to make one in the past, I've often found that coming up with an idea is easy, but ensuring there's proper meat on the bones is the tricky part, though I think I've found a subject where I have plenty to mull over. As such, the video is entitled On Localization and Adaptation and Why They're Such Thorny Subjects, inspired by a lot of the discussion I've seen around foreign media and comic book adaptations. I saw a lot of similar arguments occurring for both, so my focus was to try and better understand and fairly represent the common arguments. It'll be my first time doing this in a long time, so any and all feedback is appreciated on that count. With that said, that's all I have for this update. Once tomorrow's video is published, that'll be a wrap. So after that, I will see you all next year for whatever awaits us.